when you gain insight into how your emotional life has been configured, as well as other people's emotional lives, you can have a more conscious filter in the way your past experiences are viewed under your current experiences. It was honestly interesting to me. I had a situation where I was thinking about a relationship that I was in my between when I was 18 and 20. And this relationship, looking back, there was a lot of gaslighting and all of that. However, when I looked at it from the lens, the conscious filter, the reality was I also wasn't showing up as my best self in that relationship, right? Now looking back, when I had the consciousness of the filter through which I was looking at past experiences, it took me 3 years to finally really heal myself and get into my relationship with my now husband. I was more capable of knowing my own emotional life and understanding the emotional lives of others. Hey mama, welcome to episode 69 of the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. Today on the podcast, we will be continuing our conversation on investing in relationships. So this is a continuation of last week's episode where we explored some of the ways we lose our bids for connection, and then we began the conversation on how we discover our emotional communication systems. And so today, we are going to be diving into our emotional heritage, how to examine it. We're going to talk about our emotional philosophy based on the 4 different kinds of emotional philosophies in families. We're also going to talk about the value of emotional attachment and talk about a little bit about emotional vulnerability and why it's important in relationships. So this, again, is a continuation of investing in relationships. And I know that I promised you that it was going to be a 2-part episode, but the more I outline the episode, the more I realize that it's going to take more than 2 episodes. And so this is actually going to be part 2 of 4. So part 2 is today, and then next week we're going to talk about how we sharpen our emotional communication skills. And then we're going to wrap up the series by talking about finding shared meaning and how to put what we've been learning over this series into practice. So bear with me. I know I said it was going to be 2 episodes. First, I said it was going to be 1. But I really, really think that this is such important work. And I don't want to just glean over it. I want to share insights. I want to really share what's the information and the research. And so I thought it would be more important to just split it into 4. And that way you have so much content to go through and, start doing the work. So welcome to the episode. Hey mama, you deserve a life free of overwhelm and burnout. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. I'm your host, life and mindset coach, Shiro Bergbauer. I'm also a wife, mom, and CRNA. This is the podcast for high-achieving mamas in medicine like you and I. Together, we'll learn how to navigate the ups and downs of working motherhood. If you're looking to thrive in your relationships and overcome overwhelm in your motherhood, marriage, and medicine, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. Before we begin, I want to tell you, a funny story. Maybe it's funny to me, but it's not funny to you. The other week, I was re-listening to a podcast interview that Brene Brown interviewed the Gottmans, so Dr. John Gottman and Dr. Julie Gottman, who founded the Gottman Institute. And it's, the second time I'm listening to this episode, and I was so just sometimes you listen to something and you're like, wait, I think I missed that. I don't remember hearing that the first time. And it was just so interesting to me because I've watched this episode, listened to it a couple of times now. But the funny story that I want to share is John Gottman was talking and I was just I feel like I know this guy. Like, I feel like I know him so well. And I reflected on like the first time I really started doing work from the Gottman Institute. And it was right after I had my daughter, and I was like just, reading a lot of things, and I ran across And Baby Makes Three, which I will be linking in the show notes. And it was just so well written. And the thing I loved the most was that the work that the Gottman Institute puts out on relationships and marriage and parenting and all the things, it's research-based, it's science-based, it's like empirical information, it's not anecdotal. They've literally put couples in labs and watched them interact, so they have all these predictors for like relationships. Anyway, you get the point. But I totally first of all, it's like two of my favorite groups of humans, so the Gottmans and Brene Brown, sitting down to have a conversation. So of course, I was like so happy the first time the episode came out. I believe it came out in 2020 or 2021. I don't remember. But so anyway, I go to sleep that night and I had this dream that I was I was somewhere in Oregon, and I've never been to Oregon, but in my mind I was in Oregon. And I ran into Dr. John and Julie Gottman, and we were talking, and we're talking like old friends. And I was just telling them how their work had changed my life, and it's gotten me to think about relationships so differently. And then I woke up in the morning and I was like, wait, I never really met them. Because I was like, I don't know. I was in my mind, I was like, yeah, when I had this meeting with the Gottmans, and then it was like, actually, I never met them. Anyway, I just thought it was funny that I had obviously been thinking a lot about the Gottmans. So I wanted to share a quote that John Gottman told Brene Brown in that interview, and kind of touch a little bit on a topic that he talks about. And I will kind of actually have another relationship series where we'll cover that topic. But what he said was so profound. He said, we know that people are not looking for their clone. Similarity is not the basis of attraction. So we want something really interesting and different from who we are. And the real problem that people get into when they form a relationship is then trying to turn that person into them and thinking, I'm perfect, but you're inadequate because you're not like me. And what emerges is criticism. And, when you think about it, it's like we just think, yeah, I'm going to say this thing to my partner, like, oh, this is how you're not like me. And your partner is going to be like, well, why, thank you so much for that insightful information. I am going to change immediately. And we all know that that's not what happens. But we start to want the people that we're in relationship with to be like us. And it's not just our spouses. It could be our children. It could be our friends, our workplace relationships. And criticism is really a predictor of how relationship ends. And it's actually what is described as one of the 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse, which are communication styles that, according to the research by the Gottmans, can predict the end of a relationship. The other 3 are contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And the reason I want to just kind of thought about sharing that at the beginning of this episode is because on June 4th, I will be hosting a workshop, a free workshop called the Mommy Makeover Relationship Edition. And in that workshop, I'm going to be teaching some of the skills that are important in order for us to thrive in relationships. And so if you've been following along this series, I think that workshop will kind of tie in a lot of the things that I've been talking about in the relationship series, but also teach you the basic skills to create emotional awareness so you can have better relationship. And the reason I want to do this is because I wholeheartedly believe that we deserve happy and fulfilling relationships. So this workshop is for you if you are eager to have a better marriage, or you are eager to have better thriving friendships, you're eager to connect with your kids and have a better relationship with them, you are dating and want to have the basic skills to show up as your best self, or you want to change your mindset in any relationship. It's going to be an interactive, fun, and insightful workshop, and I'll be hosting it on Zoom. The link to register for it will be on the show notes. So only those who are registered will obviously be able to receive the workshop. And if you cannot join live, you will receive the replay of the workshop in podcast form. And that will kind of give you the insights on what we're studying. But I would really, really love to have you live so we can all interact. We can all talk about, all the things relationship related and, learn from each other and maybe share insights on how some of the tools we're learning are helping us change our relationships. When I think about the women like you who I interact with through the podcast, through my social media, I think that we are such a brilliant batch of women. We are highly sensitive, achieving, emotionally intelligent. We are so smart. We have all these goals that we set out to achieve, and we achieve them when we blow our minds with all the things we accomplish. But we sometimes get stumped in our relationships, which are the things that matter to us. Our motherhood relationships, our marriage, our dating, our friendships. And I just feel so strongly that if we can just learn the tools and start to put them into practice, we can have the relationships that we want. We can show up as our best selves. So I hope you can join me on June 4th. It's going to be fun, like I said. And I'd just like to meet a lot of you virtually who I've never met. And we can just have a ball and set the stage for having the best relationships in our lives. So hope you can join me. So today we're going to be talking about our emotional heritage. And when I was thinking about this topic, something very interesting came to my mind. See, I grew up in East Africa. I grew up in Kenya. And in my culture, expressions of love are not very common. So the funny thing, when I think about in my native language, Kikuyu, the word for love and the word for like are the same word. We use the same word to either say I love somebody or I like someone or I like something. There is no distinguished. And so for me growing up, saying I love you wasn't something that was common. It just wasn't. And I know it's common in some families, even though they grew up in that culture. It just was not common in my culture. When I moved to the U.S. with my family, I noticed a bit of a shift in that my parents would actually express the words I love you to us. And again, I was in my late teens and I didn't connect the dots obviously then. And looking back, I somehow faulted my parents for never telling us that they loved us when we were little. It's so funny when you think about it. And the more I thought about it and went into the questions about how, we start to think about our emotional heritage, one of the questions that comes up is, how did your parents let you know that you were loved? And it's actually comical because now I see it. I see it so clearly, which it wasn't so clear, obviously, before. But when I think about my parents and how they showed us that they loved us, it wasn't the textbook saying I love you, therefore we knew we were loved. It was providing for us. It was sacrificing so many things so that, I just think of my mom sacrificing so that my siblings and I would have an amazing education. We would have the best things. We didn't know we lacked for anything. My mom's love language, for example, is cooking. When I had my daughter, my mom stayed with us for 2 weeks and she was cooking from dawn to dusk. I mean, she was just cooking. And I remember one time feeling overwhelmed because she wanted me to take her to the grocery store. And I realized that the reason she didn't want to just sit at home is because she really wanted to make sure that when she left, we had all the food to eat. And, so when I think about expressions of knowing that you were loved, and my dad was the kind of person who was kind of sentimental, but I really honestly don't recall my dad saying the words I love you. But he would do little things like birthday cards and, little gifts, just little one-off things here and there. And I never because I moved here when I was, still in my teens, I was just wait, they never said they loved us. Does that mean they didn't love us? And when I think about the sacrifices to get us where we are today, my siblings and I, I know that we were loved, right? And so emotional heritage is how we were treated growing up and how that treatment made us feel. Now, I've also mentioned in the past that there were times in my life where we were physically punished. And the way I look at that punishment is that it didn't really connect me with my parents. It actually pushed me further away from them. And so that kind of treatment did not make me feel loved, even though their intentions were to discipline us or to teach us a lesson. It just didn't feel good. And so my emotional heritage when it came to that kind of, treatment was that didn't make me feel good. The other question was, how did those who were close to us act when they were sad, happy, or fearful? And I always think, when I think about the emotion of empathy, I think of my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. She was the kind of person that would watch a movie and just be crying. And she would just be like, oh, it's this poor person. And we were like, it's a movie or it's a TV show. She was obsessed with soap operas and telenovelas. In Kenya, we would get The Bold and the Beautiful 5 years after the fact. But she would get emotionally intrigued. She'd be like, I don't like Caroline Spencer. And we had a show we used to watch called The Lady of the Rose, and she would give us nicknames from characters in that show. She would just be like, you remind me of this person. She would get very emotional, just from shows. And so I just learned the emotion of empathetic connection from watching my grandma, because she was just so emotional. When she was sad, she would express herself. It just was beautiful. And when she was happy, she was very jovial. And just when I think about those emotions, I think of my maternal grandmother. The thing is, our emotional heritage has a very strong impact on our ability to connect with other people emotionally. The science behind this is that in the brain, our neural pathways that carry emotional messages are actually quite malleable. And so they can be changed by our experiences, especially those experiences that we encountered in early childhood. Because as you can imagine, your brain is growing really rapidly. And so these systems are like railroad tracks. They're under construction and they're moving very fast. However, even though we can have fixed patterns of reacting emotionally to a particular kind of comment or situations, what the science has shown is that people can change their responses, particularly if they can re-experience the same kind of stimulus under a new and different life circumstances. Which I'm going to say something funny, which has nothing to do with changing the response, but it kind of does. So we were driving to Kansas the other week, and my daughter was sitting next to me, and I accidentally splashed her with water. And so in my language, my grandma's, we call grandma Shosho. And so my daughter looks at me dead in the eye and she's like, when we get to Shosho's house, I am going to tell her that you splashed water on me on purpose. And I was like, okay, first of all, I didn't, but okay, what is she going to do? And I have told my daughter that we were spanked growing up. We do not spank in our household. So she goes, and Shosho is going to spank you. And honestly, I just thought it was comical. However, as a child, when those scenarios would happen, the threat of getting punished would appear, it was not a comfortable, time, right? Now, you don't have to keep reacting to new events and new interactions with the same automatically painful responses. And so one way you can start working on this is you understand how yesterday's feelings color today's experience and can make a difference in your ability to form strong, healthy bonds with others. So if you are aware that the way you've been reacting to things has not been productive and has not helped you show up as your highest self, you may decide, you know what, maybe I don't want to respond to criticism from my spouse this way because it was painful, when I was criticized as a child, and then I would have a painful response. The other thing is that when you gain insight into how your emotional life has been configured, as well as other people's emotional lives, you can have a more conscious filter in the way your past experience through which you view your current experience. So you can the way your past experiences are viewed under your current experiences. And, it was honestly interesting to me. I had a situation where I was thinking about a relationship that I was in my between when I was 18 and 20 or 21. And this relationship, looking back, like there was a lot of gaslighting and all of that. However, when I looked at it from the lens of like the conscious filter, the reality was I also wasn't showing up as my best self in that relationship, right? Now looking back, and I had to go through a whole forgiveness exercise to forgive myself the way I showed up in that relationship, forgiving my ex for the way he showed up in that relationship, the way he treated me, the way I treated myself, the way the heartbreak, all that, enduring. And the person who I dated immediately after that, who I ended up breaking his heart in tiny little pieces because I wasn't recovered from it. When I had the consciousness of the filter through which I was looking at past experiences, it took me 3 years to finally really heal myself and get into my relationship with my now husband. I was more capable of knowing my own emotional life and understanding the emotional lives of others. So the other thing is that when you have this awareness of your own filter, you're able to read and interpret other people's bids for connection more accurately, and also respond to those bids based on who you are today, not who you used to be or what you experienced. So I just thought that was important to highlight. So let's talk a little bit about emotional philosophy. So every family has its own culture and its own philosophy of emotion. So I want you to think about when you were growing up, can you kind of identify the philosophy of emotion in the home you grew up with? So I'll give you the 4 research-based categories of emotional philosophy, and they're very broad. The first one is coaching. The second one is dismissing. The third is laissez-faire. And the fourth is disapproving. So emotionally dismissing emotional philosophy sounds like when you have a situation, you're told you'll get over it, or you're told just cheer up, almost toxic positivity. Emotion disapproving philosophy is when you're in a family and you show up and you express maybe you're sad or you feel disappointed, and the response you receive is, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Or you're told, well, you better change your attitude. Laissez-faire is when you are told, I understand how you feel, but there's no follow-up after that. And then emotion coaching is, I understand how you feel, let me help you. So there's empathy, and then there's the reflection of what you just mirrored. And that kind of philosophy leads to more bidding, because if you are raised in that philosophy, one, you bid better, but people in that philosophy are able to turn towards bids with guidance and coping, versus people who are emotionally dismissed. First, they lead, their bonding is poor and bidding is poor, and they turn away from bids for connection because that's how they were taught, is just be dismissive. Emotion disapproving also leads to less bidding, and those people turn against bids. Those who grew up in a laissez-faire emotional philosophy may or may not lead to more bidding, and those people usually turn toward, but without offering guidance for coping. So they may turn toward your bid, but it's like they don't know what to do next because there was never an after step after they were told, I understand how you feel. So thinking of that, and I've talked about this in previous episodes about how we feel our feelings. In episode 60, we talked about how to feel your feelings and stop buffering. I want to talk a little bit about why do we avoid our emotions? When you think about emotions, right, not joy or ecstatic excitement, I'm talking about sadness, anger. It's so much easier to stay emotionally detached and to dismiss and deny uncomfortable feelings because, one, it takes time and effort to sit with your emotions. So imagine you're feeling sadness and I say to you, well, just, sit and process the emotion. Sometimes my clients will say, well, how long is that going to take? And I honestly don't know because, for me, it took me a month to process an emotion of sadness, and it took me 2 weeks to process some grief emotions, and sometimes it's taken me a month to process grief. So I don't know. So it's not comfortable. It's not a nice, happy, cheery, airy-fairy spot to be. But the work of having emotional awareness, it pays off in the long term. But in the short term, grief, anger, and fear can be so dramatically distracting from the workday load world, right? So in fact, when we think about workplaces, we're often told to leave our emotions at home. Like nobody wants to deal with you if you're going through grief, or maybe even in friendships when people start avoiding you because every time they see you, you're still grieving. So all this to say, sometimes dealing with difficult emotions can interfere with productivity. And our culture also discourages people from paying attention to difficult feelings because getting to the root of what makes you angry or sad can actually bring change in your life. And many of us are uncomfortable with change. And that can also take you away from the role which you've been cast, whether that role fits you or not. So for example, if you're dealing with grief and you've always been the quote unquote strong one, and now you can't be that, the people who have depended on your strength, it may make them very, very uncomfortable. When you think about in the movie Encanto, when Luisa says, I'm the strong one, and it's like she's not allowed to feel her feelings, it's like, wowza, like if you start feeling your feelings now, who's going to lift these, donkeys and bricks and do all the things if you're sitting over there feeling your emotions? Like, we need you to pony up and get to work, no pun intended, but we need you to get with the program and do the thing. We don't need you to be over here with your feelings. But perhaps the strongest and most basic reasons why we avoid our emotion is to avoid experiencing the very real pain that emotions can bring. I mean, when you think about processing anger, processing sadness, processing grief, the emotions that come up can be very, very, very uncomfortable, right? And I venture that most people would rather be, dancing and singing rather than dealing with their feelings. That's just human nature. We don't want to deal with that stuff. It's not comfortable. It's not pleasant. So what is the value of emotional attachment? So I want you to think about like emotions like irritation, anger, terror, despair. As the exploration of the brain's emotional command systems shows in the research by the Gottmans, these feelings are actually written into our genetic code. They're part of what it means to be human. So when we deny the existence of difficult feelings, we are living a half-life. Going back to the concept of life is 50-50. In order for us to experience joy, we have to know what sadness feels like. In order for us to experience success, we have to understand failure. We have to feel despair, right? So when there's the worst of it, and if you always try to stay emotionally detached, you basically build a wall between yourself and others who are dealing with the same emotion. It's when you're dealing with grief, but you pretend that you're okay, and other people who are grieving think that there's something wrong with them because they can't shake off their grief. We build these barriers in a bid to protect ourselves, but actually we create more divide with the people who love us and the people we love the most. Now, unless you know and understand your own feelings, you cannot know and understand what others are feeling. And unless you can show them evidence that you actually understand them, you won't be able to emotionally bond with them, right? So think about like if your partner is going through despair and you don't understand or know the feeling, you can't show evidence that you do understand them, so you won't be able to connect when they try to bid with you for connection in their grief. In fact, you will isolate them yourself, and then you will have this like, well, I don't know what to do, so I couldn't have helped you. And sometimes in conversations when we realize all we had to do was understand our own feelings and be comfortable with those feelings and sit with them, see where we feel them in our bodies, see what our emotional reaction to those emotions can be, like physical reactions. Sit in that emotion. Allow yourself to feel. In Mark Brackett's book, Permission to Feel, he illustrates this so well, where it's like you need to know your feelings, name them, understand them, make friends with anger, irritation, terror, despair. Make friends with those negative emotions. And what I've learned in my own work is that my ability to understand my anger, my frustration, my fear, my irritability, resentment has helped me so much to understand my 3-year-old's emotional upheavals. This morning, my daughter asked me, and I was just helping her into my nanny's car because I was leaving to work at the same time, and she asked me a question and I answered yes. And I thought she asked me, "Are you going to buckle me in?" And so when we got in the car, she said, "Well, you said you were going to sit with me." And I said, "No, I didn't." She said, "Yeah." And she was so angry. And in that moment, I connected with her because I knew what it feels like to hear something and then realize that the person is arguing with what you heard. And instead of me arguing with her, well, I said that, I was just like, "I'm so sorry you misunderstood me. And I know you feel very, very angry." And I just sat with her in that emotion. And then we talked about last day of school is in 2 weeks. And I am actually taking the day off because I'm a room parent and I'll be able to do this after, the party for the last day of school. And I said, "You know what? We're going to have a mommy and me date. We're going to just hang out." And I was like, "Where would you like to go?" And so she said, "I want to go to Color Factory," which is like her favorite place. And in that moment, like if I had not been able to understand my own anger, my own, impulsivity when something doesn't go the way I wanted it to go, I wouldn't have been able to connect with her. And I would not have been able to bond in that moment and turn that anger moment for her into a moment of connection. So if you haven't listened to episode 60, I will link it in the show notes also so that you can remember how to feel your feelings and to stop buffering. So next up, I'm going to talk about emotional vulnerability. So recently I was having a conversation with one of my clients and she was expressing how it's difficult sometimes for her to be vulnerable with her partner and like just to express herself. And, many people they believe this is a huge problem because they're just like, "What's wrong with me? I can't be vulnerable." But actually, it's not uncommon to be uncomfortable with vulnerability. See, when we're open to feeling and expressing our emotions, we can better understand the enduring vulnerabilities that each of us carry as a result of surviving painful events and relationship. Enduring vulnerability is a term that's coined by Tom Bradbury to describe the elements in our past that have had such a powerful negative impact on our lives that it's impossible to shake their influence. Often these elements are incidents of loss, betrayal, abuse, or trauma. And all of this injury and healing affects how we relate to other people. If you think about it, there's a concept by Eckhart Tolle who wrote The Power of One, and he talks about our pain body. And our pain bodies can be the way we react to something that has nothing to do with what is being said in the moment that connects us to something in the past. So for me, my pain body is related to criticism. I was criticized a lot as a child. And so my pain body would show up as a very idiosyncratic reaction to my husband saying something like, "Why did you leave your socks on the floor?" And I would go there. I would go to the place of being a child, being told I'm not enough and I'm not doing good enough and I'm not doing this. And turn that, "Your socks are on the floor," into "You're not enough. You're not good enough. You're worthless. You don't know what you're doing. You think you're smart, but you're not." And the moment I was able to understand that this was a pain body for me, I was able to disconnect criticism from my childhood and understand that what I was being criticized for in that moment didn't have to bring up all the things that I was criticized for as a child. It also helped me understand that sometimes our biggest fears of loss or rejection or abandonment can show up in relationships where we are not even at risk of being rejected or abandoned. And going back to the previous conversation, I was talking about this relationship that I was in, which was, again, and I was young, and at the time I thought I was not young, but I just remember how traumatic the breakup was. It was horrific. Like I would literally lie in bed for hours, just like don't want to get up, don't want to do anything. And I always remember the conversation started with, we need to talk. And so when I dated after that, when somebody would say we need to talk, I had already prepared to run and flee because we need to talk meant you're breaking up with me and it's going to be horrific and I don't want to deal with it. And so I was relating to people from the place of when somebody says we need to have a conversation, they're really just telling me they don't want to be with me anymore. And sometimes it could be like literally we just need to talk about like let's plan a trip to go out of town. And so having that awareness is so important because when we stop making those experiences show up in our relationships and mean that we cannot trust ourselves and one another, they just undermine the way we connect. And so because these can actually result in our new relationships that have nothing to do with the previous relationships, we have to be aware of them. And most often, these vulnerabilities surface around issues of inclusion, affection, and control. So unless we understand how those painful events from the past have helped form us, unless we can talk about this with people we're close to, we can continue to have problems that seem impossible to solve, right? We can continue to punish people for our past. And so one of the exercises in the relationship cure is looking at reactions and conversations and interactions between us and our parents, our siblings, our lovers, our peers, our close friends, and coworkers. And looking for evidence in those relationships where we felt like, we didn't have enough control. We were being excluded. We were being coerced or controlled. We were being treated unfairly. Were we being abused or humiliated? Were we not receiving affection or signs of affection? Were we not being accepted? Areas where we were being betrayed, being rejected, being ignored or neglected, being disrespected. Just like think about other injuries that might have happened that affect your enduring vulnerabilities. Maybe consider going through that list and asking yourself like, okay, these areas, how am I maybe showing up in, I felt like in a relationship with my parents, I was being excluded. How am I showing up in my friendships, assuming that I'm being excluded because of the past trauma of being excluded in my relationship with my parents, or being betrayed in a romantic relationship? How am I using that to not show up as my highest self in my marriage or my dating relationship? How is that affecting me? Now, it is so important for us to understand why we should share our enduring vulnerabilities with the people that we love and the people that we are connecting with. Because when we do that, we share our enduring vulnerabilities with the people that we trust. And again, keyword, trust. We put all the cards on the table. We say, sometimes I may react because I'm worried that I'm being excluded. I may react because I'm looking for, signs of being rejected or signs of being disrespected or being humiliated, or I'm sensing that I'm being, treated unfairly, or I feel like I don't have enough control. And so I just want to share that because this is how that showed up in my emotional heritage. This is how I was conditioned to believe that I didn't belong or I was not loved or I wasn't cared for. Just noticing and allowing yourselves to just express that to the people that you trust and share that with them. Because we can use this knowledge and share it to make bids for emotional connections that strengthen our relationships. Now, again, it does take a lot of courage to share these vulnerabilities, right? And one of the things that I read in the relationship cure is like, especially in the workplace, right? Like when we think about work, it's hard for us to like share our vulnerabilities with our manager or our coworker. Now, if you're close to that person and you trust them, it may still be difficult. But the interesting thing is, issues of control, affection, and inclusion can be the most challenging at work. So it also makes sense that this also might be the place where welcome risk, risking sharing our emotional vulnerability, can result in a welcome gain, right? Because if we can be open about, hey, I'm not feeling included, and I've always felt that way, even when there was no evidence because of such and such a thing that happened in my upbringing, this is why I might have an adverse reaction to feeling like I'm not being invited on a project, or to feeling like I'm not being invited to share my knowledge, right? So having that awareness of, hey, this might actually be the place where if I can find somebody that I trust and share my enduring vulnerability, it may be to the best benefit of the group and myself. When you do understand your own enduring vulnerabilities and you have shared the willingness to talk about them with people that you trust, it creates a stage for us to form deep and solid relationships. Because we can then allow them the space to also share their vulnerabilities with us, right? Like if we can share how we're feeling in a trusting and like open space, then they can be like, okay, I have your back. So I know you have my back. And we can share that and form deeper connections. So the other essential element is that when you're willing to listen openly, when a friend or loved one tells you stories of the hard times they have endured, the events that are the most unforgettable parts of their emotional heritage, right? When you're willing to do that, these conversations form the foundation for profound emotional connection. Now, I just remember like the first time I shared with my husband like this horrific heartbreak, and he said to me, if I ever meet that guy, I'll kick him in the knees. I was like, that was not why I shared that with you. But over time, what I noticed was that because I was willing to share with my husband that I had not felt that I was treated fairly, I was not treated with compassion. When the relationship came to an end, I found out a lot of things that had not been shared with me honestly in the relationships. So I was starting to develop like a fear of trusting people, which I'm like the person that believes what everybody tells me. And because I was aware of that, I think my husband showed up in a way that he made it very clear that I had no reason not to trust him. Like, my husband is the kind of person who he will like just like tell me the thing even before I question it, because I feel like that's just who he is as a person. But also he was attuned to like, he never wanted me to feel that I couldn't trust him because he knew how hurtful that was to me. And I always like remember, when I first met my husband and he would try to do nice things for me and I would be like, what does he want? Like, what does he want from me? Because I couldn't understand the concept of somebody just wanting to be nice to me just to be nice, because I had been so hurt. And that took a while. It really did. But it just really helped us connect from the very beginning of our relationship, in that we shared like very deep conversations. He shared with me some of his family history, and I shared my family history with him, and we were very open. And it was like all bets were off. Like, I was just willing to show up as who I truly authentically was. And so was he. And then we had to decide, like, is this something that we can both live with? Do we like each other that much? Or like, you're too crazy for me, I don't want to be here, type of thing. And the good news is we ended up together 13 years later. We have obviously built a life for ourselves and raising an amazing child. But it all started with setting the foundation of having a profound emotional connection. And I will say that even though I didn't know the science and even though I didn't know the research, I think having that understanding has been so important in our marriage, because we can solve so many problems because of our emotional connection. We don't ever go to bed angry at each other without at least tabling the issue and just saying, I care about you, you care about me. We're not settling this debate tonight, but we're not going to bed mad at each other. And I believe it's because from the moment we connected, we were willing to share our emotional, enduring vulnerabilities, even though I didn't know the word for it. So that is all I have for this part. Next week, we are going to talk about how to sharpen our emotional communication skills. And then the following week, we'll combine finding shared meaning with putting the work into practice and tie everything together and put a little bow on top of it and then go out and do the work. So I hope you're enjoying this series. I am having so much fun outlining the episodes, going back through the readings again, enjoying it and loving it, and sharing the Gottman work with you because I think it's amazing work. I just, I love science, I love research, and I love that this work is based on actual empirical research. So, love it. And having said that, I'm actually working on my certification to lead a marriage workshop for couples. And it's a workshop that's related to basically the 7 secrets to thriving marriages. And I want to tell you guys the real name of the certification. It's to be certified as a leader, to teach the 7 principles for making marriage work. And so there'll also be a series we'll be talking about that book and the work of that. And then I'll start giving you some workshops here and there. But I really just want to get the message out as far as improving our relationships. And so that will be very marriage-based. And we'll talk about like predictors for divorce and the 7 principles again, and understanding all the things about how we love each other and how we connect. But I thought that this series would be a good start to understanding our emotional connection. So I will see you next week. Have a great week. Bye now. I'm Shira Bergbauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes are out every Monday. These episodes are created by me, Shira Bergbauer, and produced by Cassidy Mitchell. If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, please rate it and review us on Apple Podcasts. If the concepts I share on this podcast resonate with you, or you're ready to change your relationships and mindset, I can help you. If you'd like in-depth, personalized support, I'd love to invite you to apply for my Life and Mindset coaching program. Just imagine you and I every week working together as I teach you the tools to up-level your life. To book your free 1-hour consultation call, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation. You're doing a great job, Mama. Have a great week. Bye now.